Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Modern Sage podcast. I'm Leah Guy, your host. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you know from time to time, I will deliver a solo podcast, which I call Notes on Healing. And these are simply notes from my own work that I take on important topics that I hear people referring to. I keep an eye on social media and what's in the news, if you will, in our self-help and wellness, and want to address these topics. And so today we are talking about self-abandonment. What is it and how we can stop abandoning ourselves? Before we get to it, I just want to remind you that if you are enjoying this podcast, please leave a rating or a review. It helps so much, and share it with your loved ones. You can also find these podcasts on YouTube. You can watch us live in person on my YouTube channel. All the links are in my profile on Instagram, Facebook, and my website. All right. So today we're talking about self-abandonment. This is a hefty topic, and so I have a full page of notes that I want to make sure I get to help us understand and make sense of what it is and how we can compassionately turn our behavior and our mindset so that we can alleviate some of the ongoing abandonment issues that show up in our lives. Now, some people say, well, I don't feel like I abandoned myself. I'm living my life. I'm here. We might want to think of abandonment as like a form of self-sabotage. Self-abandonment, differently than self-sabotage, is that we are abandoning the parts of us that know what they want or need. Now, sometimes there's parts of us that don't know what we want or need. And I think a lot of us are in the healing cycle and as a seeker trying to figure that out for ourselves, depending on our background, our history, our environment, our upbringing. Many of us were told how to think or what to want or what to say and how to behave. And in those circumstances, it can be challenging to unravel for ourselves who we are and what is our identity beyond the labels, and what do we truly want to need? What is our authentic self? And some of us, and for some parts of us, we may know in certain circumstances what we want and need and our authentic self, but then we don't deliver for self for a variety of reasons. So I'm going to just kind of go through my notes today and speak about each one as I read through it, okay? To try to get to all of this without it being some presentation. The first thing I want us to understand about self-abandonment and self-sabotage, but self-abandonment in particular today, is that it is a learned behavior. And the wonderful thing about learned behaviors is that we can unlearn them. So this learned behavior we've adopted at some point, either by being told directly how to behave or to satisfy the needs and wants of other people so that we don't get abandoned in love and attention and getting our needs met. We've learned how to act and behave so that that doesn't happen. But in the process, we have abandoned the very thing that we want and need for ourselves in a higher way. So in general, there's a natural rhythm and pulsing to life, to the cycles of nature, to the cycles of the seasons, to the cycles of our age and the period that we're in our life. And through these natural cycles, we should be paying attention to how our wants and needs are developing. Because what you want and need today may be different than what you want and need yesterday. That doesn't mean that your authentic self is polarized in any way or that you're not being authentic. It means that as we blossom and grow and evolve in our lives and learn and discover who we really are and what our life is about, and as we find meaning in our lives and our hearts and our minds about what we're doing here, then our wants and needs are likely to change. And that's okay. It is natural. And so a big piece about what we're going to be talking about with the abandonment, self-abandonment, one, if you've read my book, you know about boundaries, which are important for all of us. Not easy, important, but about boundaries and honoring where we are in our lives right now. We've learned to ignore the most natural aspects about us. the most natural, innate parts of you that have passion, that have curiosity, that have reaction, responses, the parts of you that want to engage with the world. We've learned to ignore the sensation, the feeling, or the ideas about what is going on within us because we're so fixated on attending to and putting our energy outside of ourselves to be responsive or reactive for other people. Now, I want to be clear here that yes, I believe we are here in service of one another and the interconnectedness of all things, of our oneness, that it is not a solo life of it's about me, me, me. No, there's a fine distinction between being self-absorbed and being self-aware. And I do believe it is our job to be self-aware enough to caretake for this vessel that is carrying our soul, as well as interact with the world that is around us and other people in a way that offers our service, our skills, our love, our compassion, our empathy. So those are two different things. But when we learn to ignore and take on these learned behaviors, learn to ignore the most natural parts of us, which is a feeling that arises, which is a thought, an inspiration, a desire. We ignore those things for the pursuit of something else, we have abandoned ourselves. And it's amazing, really, when you stop and look at your day, how often we abandon ourselves, and sometimes for no good reason. I am like a child when it comes to going to bed. I know full well that when I go to bed early and when I wake up early, I feel terrific. I feel so much better, more energy, all kinds of things. There's a child in me that wants to push the limits, wants to rebel against the system, that also wants to return to a lower vibrational state, which is, I talk about emotional addiction, of that less than feeling or a pain feeling. And so I push my limits to see how long I can stay up. And then knowingly will wake up later the next day and not feel good. So recently, I've been working really, really hard to have a consistent schedule. Going to bed early, waking up early, it feels great. Doing my routine early, the whole 9 yards. And when I do that, I experience the rewards of centeredness, less puffiness around my eyes, more focus, better feeling in my body. Last night, for example, a recent example, I pushed myself again and stayed up an hour or so too late. In the doing it, because of the self-awareness, I was recognizing that I'm abandoning myself. I was getting upset and angry at myself for abandoning myself, but still pushing nonetheless. Now, that's a pretty substantial conflict. And if you can relate to what I'm saying, I think you'll understand here that when we are pushing our own limits in that self-sabotaging way and abandoning our higher needs or our authentic needs, because we are we're pushing our limits. It's our job. We have to understand why. Oftentimes, there's an emotional undercurrent that is unsettled, that wants to express itself. That emotional undercurrent may be leftover anger from the day, or resentment, or anxiety, feeling unjustified, sadness, distraught, upset, maybe even thrill or eagerness, or other positive emotions that have overtaken us and gone too far that we can't regulate. Either way, there's an emotional, emotions that are unresolved. And so it will cause us to fall off our center and then start into the old repetitive patterns of our emotional addiction to sabotage or abandon our higher needs. Now, if I hadn't known that I needed to go to bed early and wake up early, or if you're not aware of what actually serves you, then you may just feel caught in a perpetual loop of punishing yourself or abandon or self-sabotage, and it's expressed multiple times throughout the day. But I wanted to give you that example about sleep because it's a very clear example of, I know I did it anyway, and what is my job there then? To get back on track, to be true to myself. Journal, write out my feelings and thoughts, meditate, take some deep breaths, soothe myself, counsel myself, etc., so that I can, even though late, continue to go to bed, fall asleep, and wake up as early as possible and resume my routine. So when we ignore the parts of us that are most basic, whether it's sleep time, whether it's basic emotions that we don't know what to do with, then we turn off a part of ourselves, and then we basically shut the door to self-abandon there and redirect our attentions elsewhere. So I hope this is making sense. I don't want to belabor that point too much about how to recognize the self-abandonment, but the point is that every day, some of us, or maybe more frequently than just once a day, maybe throughout the day, some of us are abandoning parts of ourselves. And that can also look like saying yes when you mean no, or saying no when you mean yes. It can look like not eating the way that your body thrives, but eating other ways to make your body suffer. We can abandon ourselves in big ways every day, not following our dreams and making excuses for why we're doing what we're doing. We can abandon ourselves when we don't speak up for ourselves and go along with one of our loved ones, what they want and need, because we think that takes priority, or we're afraid that they are going to leave us. There's so many ways throughout the day that we can abandon ourselves. And I think the most important thing for now is just to become aware. One, aware that this is learned behavior, and aware that we can intercede and become our own objective witness and counsel in the moment to recognize what is going on in the process of this self-abandonment. Is it the unresolved emotions? Is it deeper emotional feelings like unworthiness or fear or negative beliefs about self that have stopped us from being true to ourselves, and then therefore ignoring the most natural aspects of us? You know, it's when I talk about the most natural aspects of us, I know people that are so timid to feel anything outside of what the expectation is. And the reality is that we are gifted with an enormous range of feelings and emotional states and experiences, reactions. And these things are a gift to us to inform us of being alive, of our own inclinations, of our own desires, to spark us or to warn us. We're gifted these emotions to experience and feel so that we can become more emotionally intelligent, not just for ourselves and for other human beings, but also in the world in which we live. When we deny the access to and the experience of these emotions, our authentic responses, then we limit ourselves of how we're taking in life and what we're also giving back to life. I'll say it again, and I feel like I say it every time I talk or teach, but maybe not. The gift of sharing how we feel authentically is one of the purest, most vulnerable gifts that we can offer to one another. When I am real with you, it allows you to be real with me. And I know it can feel scary to do so, but if I'm not real with you, if I'm lying about who I am, what I want, what I need, and how I'm experiencing the world, then I'm essentially asking you to lie about who you are, what you need, and how you're experiencing the world. And you can see in that kind of dynamic, no one is going to experience a close vulnerability. We're just make-believing. We're pretending here. I want to remind each of us that there is a calling within us. It's a calling that sometimes feels overwhelming, and then we shut it down. And sometimes feels like it's not ours, which can lead us to like imposter syndrome. But each of us has a calling. We have, as a society, created this very inflated idea of purpose. And I believe this calling within us, maybe it is or isn't directly related to a purpose that you can label, but it is a calling that leads you to live a certain way. And that calling that is leading us is often coming from our heart space. It's the soul self that's trying to express itself here, that's trying to guide us. But again, when we in the human mind and experience feel small, then we feel unworthy or too timid to follow and to feel through the heart space, to follow that calling. And for this reason is why I'm so passionate about talking about emotional addiction and emotional health, because I know we are so much more than these limitations of shame and guilt and fear and unworthiness and unlovability, these feelings that we have. We are so much more than that. Spirit doesn't want us to be limited by those false beliefs and illusions that create our idea of self in this physical. And I believe this calling that each of us has to reach out to people, to serve humanity, to have greater compassion, to live with an open heart, to access our intuition and share that with others, whatever the calling is. And maybe the calling is to do something physical in this physical world, that it's asking us to follow that as a way of a path towards joy, peace, happiness, and those higher vibrational feelings. And when we don't, we can experience a feeling of separation or being stuck, self-abandonment. So when we're thinking about who we are and what we're doing, and what is our purpose here, and what kind of legacy can I leave here, and what am I doing that has meaning in the world, this is where we in our society have inflated the notion of purpose to attach to some other egoic idea of worth, when the calling from the soul is truly more aligned with the experience of being real, open, and true to self and true to others. Some of us abandon ourselves because we hide parts of ourselves out of the shame, because we want to fit in. We don't want to be called out. We don't want to be seen, ridiculed. Some of us procrastinate and put things off as a form of abandoning ourselves. Some of us do things we shouldn't do, but not what our soul is telling us, or do things that we should do, quote, but things that our soul is telling us. Some of us don't take time to nurture our spirit, self-abandonment. Some of us lie to ourselves and others about what we want and what we need. Very basic lies. Do you want a peanut butter and jelly? No, sure. Some of us lose ourselves in relationship. Very easy to do, very common to do. We lose ourselves, especially if our learned behavior is to put other people's needs above our own, and or that in order to get our nurturing and the needs, emotional needs that we have that we didn't get when we were young people, that we're desperate to get from somebody, if we haven't learned how to give those to ourselves, we will do anything to make sure the other person is okay so that we feel okay. Some of us run from our dreams or our heart's calling and ignore those quiet and sometimes loud, varied desires. I cannot tell you how many people have shared with me, I have a book within me. I have 10 books within me. I'm going to do this. I want to do this. Whatever the heart desire is. And we run from it. I know I did for years. For years, we run from our dreams. And then we come up with the answer to the running of, I don't have time. I didn't have the money. I don't have the resources. I don't know anyone in the industry. It takes too much time. It takes too much effort. Whatever the excuses are, we come up with those to keep us running, to rationalize why we are abandoning ourselves. And why do we do this? Well, I've already stated we do it often because we have learned the behavior that either other people are more important than us. We should stifle our authentic desires and needs and feelings so that we gain approval from others. But the biggest reason that we abandon ourselves is because of fear. We are afraid of our true power, I believe. We're afraid of rejection. We're afraid of truly being seen and the vulnerability that comes with that kind of seeing one another, connection with one another. We're afraid that we'll fail. We're afraid of all of these things that have really absolutely nothing to do with our desires and our needs. The fear comes because our ego is attached to the mind self of who we are. And yes, I realize we are trying to survive and be part of the community here doing what we're doing while we're alive. But there's something deeper and bigger within you. The big I am. And your authentic self that wants you to stay true to yourself, to speak your truth, to stand up, to take your place, to connect to your purpose, to follow the calling, to open the heart. That part of you isn't afraid of failure. How can you fail when you're engaged and doing the very thing that satisfies the soul? There is no failure there. We're not trying to win something. We're not trying to prove something. We're not trying to achieve something. All of those things are attached to the ego, which is attached to the mind and that fear. We're trying to become and be the thing. We're trying to walk in alignment and in the energy frequency and in the truth of who we actually are and what we're doing here. So the fear can't exist in that space because you're enveloped in it and by it. There is nothing to achieve. So ultimately, when we self-abandon, we're basically living from an ego state and not a soul state, not a higher consciousness state. Yes, we can also abandon ourselves because we've experienced trauma in the past and we have a reactionary response that's connected to that trauma. We also have learned unhealthy relationship patterns and attachments. We're also unsure. We haven't been taught how to listen to our voice, how to speak up for ourselves, how to support ourselves truly. Many of us don't know how to trust ourselves. And so the very notion of following and being enveloped by the calling, it can be terrifying because we don't know how to trust something beyond us that's bigger than us, and we don't know how to trust ourselves, leading us back to that fear. And of course, we also all have our learned insecurities that have been developed over the years, which again is attached to fear. I want to say one thing that is very important when trying to heal this pattern of self-abandonment. And that is to be, if you can become aware of anything, is become aware of how often you apologize for yourself. And if you could stop that one behavior, stop apologizing for yourself. I know myself and many other people, you hear it all the time. I could run into a chair. I used to run into a chair and apologize to the people in the room for running into the chair, or something that had nothing to do with anyone else, but apologizing for my mere existence, almost apologizing for how you feel. That whole way of thinking is about attachment to your own ego state of others will judge you or condemn you or abandon you, or the feeling that others aren't going to love you because or understand you because you should be attending to their feelings, right? There's no reason to apologize for yourself, for having a feeling. When we are in a conscientiousness about awareness and emotion and experience and all that, we know that emotions are fleeting, thoughts are fleeting. They are meant to move and evolve and change. And that is what we want to encourage them to do. So if we can hold space for a person who's having a certain feeling, knowing that before too long, they'll have a different feeling. It may not be the feeling we want, but they'll have a different feeling because that's the way emotions go when we are processing them. If we could give ourselves that same grace to understand that I don't need to apologize for this feeling. I need to acknowledge this feeling and honor this feeling, share it if need be, and allow it to move through, knowing that I'll have another feeling soon enough. And now we're being true to ourselves. This is my truth right now. If you would like to know my truth in 5 minutes, let's check in 5 minutes. This is my truth right now. And we get to experience the myriad of emotions and thoughts. And if we are sharing them in a safe way, it's okay. We give each other space for that. Can you give yourself space for that? Another way we can think about healing through self-abandonment is to make commitments to ourselves. In my book, Overcoming Toxic Emotions, I talk about micro steps as part of the action plan, because it's my belief that when we try to achieve too much, too fast, too soon, we will fail, which just sets us up for another pattern of emotional addiction and self-punishment. If we can take micro steps in our commitments, even today, maybe I can't commit to going to bed at 10 o'clock tonight, but I feel real certain I can commit to being in bed by 10:30. That's a commitment that I'm going to keep to myself and work from there. Showing up for ourselves, even if we can't achieve all the things in one day, even if we're unsure even what to do today, because maybe we're challenged with difficult feelings, can I show up for myself? Can I speak up for myself? Knowing that I'm giving myself space to be in process, to be working through things, to be able to change my mind, to let this emotion move through and ready for another one. We can also learn better how to encourage ourselves and comfort ourselves. I know it's very tempting to just think about comforting ourselves with a nice massage or a hot bath and these kinds of things, but the true kind of comfort of what does the person within you need? Do you need attention? Do you need quiet? Do you need solitude? Do you need a hug? Do you need counsel? Do you need a certain kind of sound or music or aromatherapy? Do you need to just sit with yourself and listen? How can you soothe yourself with your own inner voice to let yourself know that you have been heard and that your needs and thoughts and desires are validated? They're important. How can we encourage and soothe ourselves? When we are self-abandoning, we are often in a self-destructive behavior that leads to depression, anxiety, insomnia, other forms of self-sabotage, difficult, toxic relationships. When we are experiencing those things regularly in our lives, we can probably be assured in some way that we have some abandonment going on. This is important to understand for self, and I want to just imagine now kind of extreme scenario of abandoning a young person. So let's just imagine that some of us have had that experience of being a kid and losing our parents at the grocery store or the mall or something like that. But let's imagine that you're with a young person, maybe a young version of you, 10 years old, 8 years old. Now, an 8 or 10-year-old, they can sometimes feel like they can take care of themselves. But imagine intentionally as the adult leaving a child, 8 or 10 years old, on the side of the road. What does that feel like? What would that feel like if you're thinking into the empathy of this 8 or 10-year-old child? What would it feel like to be driven away from or walked away from and to be left on the side of the road? It's a really bad feeling. It's a really bad feeling. In fact, it's, for a lot of us, some of our scariest feelings, the thoughts of that experience happening. So imagine now if, even though we may want to drive away from that 8 or 10-year-olds because they're driving us crazy, because they're acting up, because they're full of nerves or too much excitability, or they've maybe even done something really bad that day. Imagine if we could stay, maybe in the car, but right there with that child as they're sitting on the side of the road, just holding space for them, letting them know it's okay to be human, that we can sit with this and feel through these feelings and let them process. It's going to change. If I'm angry, if they're angry, if there's acting up, it's going to change. Can we sit with presence and beingness without punishing and without leaving? Can we just do that? Can we be aware that even though I feel like I want to run away, can I sit here with that young person, accept their humanity, acknowledge whatever it is they're feeling, even though I want to disagree, maybe breathe until we can experience a deceleration in our energy state, in our angst, in our judgment, in our fear. Can we just stay? Can we stay? For those of us who are terrified of being abandoned, and yet who also abandon ourselves, I want us each to remember, as I state in the book, we're not blaming anyone here for this, and we're also not blaming ourselves or feeling at fault for this. But this learned behavior started a long time ago, probably when we didn't get our emotional needs met as young people. Some of us didn't get our physical needs met as young people. When we have learned to people please, when we have learned to not trust our instincts, when we have learned to be perfect in order to be loved, when we have learned how to be critical of ourselves and others and judge others and ourselves, when we have learned how to not speak up, how to not honor our feelings, those are often responses to the scared, somewhat perhaps traumatized, younger version of ourselves that's trying to get what we need. I want to remind you that you are carrying precious cargo. It's not just your blood vessels and muscles and tissues and brains and organs that you are carrying. You are carrying the precious cargo of your soul. And that soul wants you to be true to yourself and carry gently. Stay connected. Allow your feelings. Maybe today you can just learn to sit with yourself on the side of the road. See if you can stay. See if you can stay. Thanks you all for listening. I hope to see you next week on the Modern Sage podcast. Don't forget, you can watch these on YouTube and promos on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and more. Check my website frequently, leahguy.com, for information about retreats, workshops, latest in my books, blog posts, and newsletters. I hope everyone has a beautiful, wonderful day, and we'll be in touch real soon.